Hello everyone, this is Bobbin Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. So at the moment, interstellar travel is impossible to perform, but very easy to conceive of. As such, speculative fiction authors have invented a variety of ways to travel between solar systems, and each one is based both on scientific theories and hypotheses, and on the demands of story and genre. After all, it's hard to create a space opera setting where each planet is over a century of travel apart, and it's hard to create a space horror setting if reinforcements are just minutes away. That's why for today's topic, I'll be looking at 7 distinct ways to travel between the stars and explain both how they work and how they can help or hinder your setting's themes. Number 1. Slower-than-light colony ships. This is, at least by modern technology standards, the most realistic method of interstellar travel. The starship uses conventional methods to speed up and slow down, and while it moves extremely fast by Earth standards, it never travels more than maybe 1 or 2% of the speed of light. As such, the ship takes years, decades, or even centuries to move between habitable star systems. A ship this slow will need to be self-sustaining, and it will need a large crew to keep it in good working order throughout the trip. That means it will have to be a large space colony, much like the ones we envision orbiting the Earth or built on asteroids, except that this colony will be traveling between stars and not maintaining a stable orbit. It's very likely that the people who start the voyage will be dead by the time the ship arrives, and so entire generations will grow up on board the ship. This method of travel is best when you want to create stories that are all about the journey rather than the destination, or if you want to write stories about generational conflict. After all, the older generations boarded the ship so that they could one day populate a new world, but the younger generation grew up on the ship and know nothing about what planet life was like or the hardships of colonizing a harsh wilderness. Number 2. Near-light hibernation ships. Traveling near the speed of light carries with it a few extra risks and demands. The fuel costs become exponentially higher the closer you get to light speed. Time dilation will cause decades to pass in regular space for every year that passes on the ship, and even a micrometeorite can cause immense damage to a ship traveling at relativistic speeds, assuming it doesn't have some sort of protection. However, while the travel time would still be measurable in years, most of the ship's population would survive long enough to reach its destination. On top of that, you would also be able to trust the ship to fly itself for that period of time, and thus you could also introduce hibernation as an option. Hibernation is a process that some animals go through to lower their metabolisms and survive an otherwise inhospitable time of year, and while humans are not a hibernating species, there have been some theories floating around that suggest that we could simulate hibernation through some combination of medication and freezing temperatures. And while you can combine this idea with pretty much any kind of interstellar travel, it's probably most useful in settings where faster-than-light travel is impossible. Near-light travel is best for settings where you want your protagonists to feel isolated. Not only is it all but impossible for help to arrive in time, but most of the passengers and crew on board are asleep at any given time, plus the people back home will have moved on without the protagonists for years in their absence. So even if they try to go home again, their home will be unrecognizable. Time dilation can also be a factor in faster-than-light travel, but you generally see it most often in slower-than-light settings. Number 3. Spatial Warp. This is the classic FTL method used by Star Trek and I'd say a majority of space opera settings. Mostly it's because warp travel most closely resembles the way we travel down here on Earth. To get from point A to point B, you need to travel the distance between them, and this travel time can take hours, days, or sometimes months, depending on distance and technology. Therefore, a story that would jump from one location to another here on Earth could instead jump from one planet to another with very little need for modification. The way a warp engine works, theoretically, is by generating a large energy field that causes space to shrink in size as it approaches the source. So if space is concentrated by a factor of 100, that would mean the starship that holds the warp engine would move 100 meters in real space for every 1 meter it travels within the warp field. Crank that field up high enough, and a ship could potentially travel several times the speed of light, without going anywhere near that fast within its own relative context. As such, settings with warp travel also don't have to worry about time dilation. They do have to worry about creating a warp field near a planet or other gravity wells, since the matter concentration would be bad for both the planet and the ship, but a lot of fiction writers don't bother with that little detail, and so neither do you, unless you want to. Number 4. Wormhole Generation. Wormholes are completely theoretical, but they seem to fit our understanding of how space and time can work. It's like a warp engine in that it involves concentrating space, but in this case, you concentrate all the space between 2 points so that you can easily move between them. You start at home, and then, just a few steps later, you reach your destination. Wormholes are most often depicted as existing in space, but some settings use wormhole travel to move between planet surfaces. Wormhole travel is best used in settings that don't want to worry about journeys at all, and instead concentrate on destinations. You can still have situations where getting somewhere in time is important, but the best way you can do that is to limit where wormholes can exist. Maybe the technology to create them is too expensive to put one in every neighborhood, or maybe wormholes are too dangerous to generate near-gravity wells like planets and stars. Number 5. Wormhole Exploitation. Natural wormholes have never been observed, but maybe that's because we don't know what we're looking for. Perhaps there are natural, stable wormhole nodes that connect various star systems together, and while it may be impossible for humans to generate enough energy to warp space, at least on that scale, it is possible to use existing wormholes and use them to travel between the stars. Pre-existing wormholes give your setting the opportunity to focus on a specific set of star systems and treat them as neighbors, even if in reality they happen to be hundreds or thousands of light years apart. Maybe Rigel and Betelgeuse have a direct connection to one another, and both of them connect to Polaris by way of Sirius. And while Alpha Centauri is our nearest neighbor in physical terms, the quickest way to get there from Sol is a 3-wormhole trip by way of Vega and Pollux. Another advantage of wormhole networks is that they give you an opportunity to focus on strategic thinking. Instead of space being wide open in every direction, space travelers have to focus on certain points in space that are much more valuable but also much more dangerous than other places. Imagine that each star is a valley in a massive mountain range, and each wormhole is a mountain pass that leads to a different valley. It is thus very easy, but also very important, to guard these points against invaders and other unwelcome intruders. Number 6. Dimensional Transfer. Instead of messing around with space and time, space travelers can move instantly from one point to another by entering a higher dimensional realm and then returning to this realm at their destination. This may actually be how wormholes work, but we're not worried about physics here, we're worried about literary devices. And so the difference between dimensional transfers and wormholes is that dimensional transfers involve leaving this universe behind and then returning to it. In some settings, dimensional transfers are harmless, painless, and involve no serious dangers aside from maybe engine strain. However, in other settings, these higher planes are home to powerful alien beings that exist beyond human understanding, and they desperately want to destroy, consume, possess, or invade whatever intrudes upon their realm. And these dangers have to be dealt with, perhaps by a neo-fascist inquisition, a spice-consuming organic calculator, or a symbiotic relationship between humans and cats. You can also use dimensional transfers to invoke multiverse theory. Maybe it turns out that you don't transfer back to your original universe, but instead you transfer to a universe that is mostly identical to the one you left behind, except that everything is 100 light years to the left. And while that thought is a little bit disconcerting, you can then make it more disturbing by having your characters encounter a universe where a few more things are different, and then a universe where everything is different, including the laws of physics. But fully exploiting multiverse theory is a topic I should save for its own video. Number 7. Instant Data Transfer. This method is potentially the fastest out of all of them, but it's also the most harrowing. Instead of physically moving between 2 locations, people have their exact physical or mental makeup scanned and then replicated at their destination. As this duplicate is created, the original is disintegrated in some fashion. A hard drive is overwritten, molecules are disassembled, that sort of thing. So the main problem with this method, at least for me, is the complete lack of continuity of consciousness. You do not teleport, you die, and a copy of you lives on. In fact, if you do things a little differently, there will be 2 versions of you running around, or more. To me, the whole process is messed up, but maybe you want to use your setting to explore why it's messed up. Or maybe you want to explore a culture that doesn't care that it's messed up. Or maybe you, the author, don't think it's messed up and you want to use fiction to prove your point. Regardless, this method erases all issues with travel times and instead moves the focus of the setting to issues of cloning and transhumanism. The last thing I'll say is that you don't have to choose just one travel method for your setting. It's entirely possible that the people in your setting can create wormholes to different areas in a solar system, but need natural wormholes to travel between stars. Or maybe everybody has warp technology, but habitable planets are so far apart and the galaxy is so big that they still need multi-generation colony ships to get from place to place. Or maybe different alien species have different travel styles, or maybe humans invent several different styles over the course of your setting's history. As always, the details are up to you. Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.